Welcome back to The Line. Number 3 on our list of the top 10 stories of the year is the budget shortfall. Lawmakers met in a special session in the fall to deal with the budget shortfall, is that word again, in the current fiscal year. Steve Terrell, let me start with you. How would you summarize the outcome of that special? I want to hold off on the upcoming regular session, but the outcome of that special. Did we get what we needed as taxpayers and as citizens in New Mexico? Was that a classic can getting kicked down the road?
They're always kicking the can down the road in the legislature. I mean, they filled the budget hole from last year, which was a problem then. Now we're going to have, what is it, 69,000, 70,000?
Million.
Million, yeah, I'm sorry, a million. So I think they did what they could. There's also the distraction of having all these law and order bills during the session, and I think that backfired on the governor, in most respects. But yeah, I think they did what they could. The thing is, they used a lot of non-recurring revenue to fill these holes. And people in almost every department I've heard go up to the LFC, the Legislative Finance Committee, have said, we can't cut anymore. We're down to the bone. Somebody used a snappy phrase during the special session, we can't cut anymore, it'll be amputation. And so, but the governor doesn't want to raise taxes. Well, we're getting into the future again here, but so that wasn't even on the table for the special session, and it may not be for the regular session either.
That's right. You know, Russell, there's a term out there I've heard Larry Larrañaga use, Representative Larrañaga, right-sizing government, right-sizing departments, because there's a thing floating around, Paul Gessing's been in this and some other folks, that as a percentage of the population, the amount of folks that we have working in state government seems top-heavy. But my pushback to that always is, well, we have more needs in some of those other states, so perhaps we should be a little bit top-heavy. Can we, in fact, cut any more and have services still provided to people in New Mexico with this kind of a budget shortfall?
If you do cut, you have to be. If you do cut, you have to be very honest of what you're cutting and what it means. If you don't want to raise revenue, if you don't want to have a gas tax or something like that, just be honest and say, we don't want to pay our cops anymore. We don't want to pay. They're gonna stay at a lower rate. We don't want to pay our teachers anymore. Their salaries are going to be stagnant. We don't want to pay our state workers anymore. Be honest in what you're going to do. And if you're not going to raise taxes, there is also no leadership. And we saw this to say, okay, we want to push a tax increase, a gas tax, because you guys have no problem when the gas goes up at market value. You have no problem paying the oil companies.
That's right.
But if you just want to add just a little bit, basically to offset that profit that we're not getting anymore, that's a problem. And I think, yes, we're top heavy, but we're also federal government heavy. We're getting a lot of money from the federal government. And without economic development, this is where we're going to end.
That's right. Julianne, this idea that we've, as Steve mentioned, we plugged holes with money that's sort of been just laying around. Now we're out of that money. And we need right now money, in the now infamous words of John Arthur Smith. And how does one make right now money into Mexico in the situation that we're in? And where does that lead us, as I asked Steve to hold off in the session, in this upcoming session? Is this the time to be brave? Is this the time to be risky? Is this the time to try some new things? Can we do that?
I think on one hand, there's some hope that with the Democrats controlling both of the houses now, rather than having the House of Representatives have a Republican majority, that made it really hard for anything to move. Right. But as we were talking about during one of the breaks, will we see Governor Martinez turn into, Gary Johnson here and become governor? No. Yes. And everything that hits her desk from the session is going to get vetoed. I think that there's a real concern with that. So are the people of New Mexico optimistic that the legislature is going to answer that question?
Right.
I mean, I think we see the little boy with his finger in the hole of the dike, and he can't hold the water back.
That's right. That's right. Are we cannibalizing ourselves now at this point? Are we? You know what I mean? We're eating away. Amputation was used earlier, Steve. You know what I mean? How much more can we cut? 2016, if it proved anything, that there is an approaching bottom. It seems to me. What would you make of that?
Yeah. So I think, again, referring to Senator John Arthur Smith, is he's talking about how everybody in the legislature is going to have to ditch positions that they think that they hold in an absolute way to figure this out. Like, it is really time for a lot of flexibility to avoid that kind of cannibalism and to avoid those amputations. Like, it's going to be one of those sessions where, it is going to be on the legislature to really, really figure something out. And to do it within the 60 days and not kick the can down the road to yet another special session potentially, which is also expensive.
That's right.
So.
That's right.
And a little not singing birthday songs
I
in
was
the
going to
session.
say the potato song. Can we
think-
just need a little bit?
The potato
more
song's fine.
memorials.
That's more. That's right.
Yeah.
But less singing and less legislative day. I mean, this is if the legislator wants to say like, we need to take care of business. Let's do this legislator days and all this stuff. I know it's great for constituents, but now it's go time.
That's right. That's a good point there. Revenues, Steve. Let's talk about that. Gas tax was talked about earlier, but overriding again another cloud in all this is the hold harmless provisions about to have a bit of a change too, and things in local communities are not going to be able to count on state money to offset their lack of revenue enhancement or taxes. Would you anticipate that local communities are going to start looking at taxes or revenue enhancements now that hold harmless is going to be ending?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to, and I guess it's less onerous or whatever if a local community votes, yes, we're going to raise our own taxes, rather than legislatures in Santa Fe doing it.
Right.
But yeah, and I agree with Julianne. I think there's going to be a lot of vetoes coming out of the governor's office. She'll veto any tax increase, I believe.
Yeah. Anything, really.
Yeah.
Is there not a will that can be built, even with a few Republicans coming on board, potentially voting yes for a revenue enhancement? Would that?
I haven't talked to any Republicans who say they're going to do that.
Right.
If there are, please give me a call.
Exactly right.
I mean, Aubrey Dunn, the state land commissioner, has said he favors raising the gas tax.
Right.
But I haven't seen a groundswell of support for him in the state senate or anything like that.
And we saw this at the Santa Fe City Council, where Councilor Joseph Maestas proposed a gas tax in the municipality that got shot down at the council level. Now we see the mayor of Santa Fe talking about taxing soda or sugary beverages to raise money. Santa Fe County is talking about raising taxes to pay for behavioral health care. So I do think that you see these local governments trying to respond to the shortfall.
Exactly right, please.
But the increase in taxes anywhere is not going to solve the right now problem that they're facing. That is, that helps the next legislative session, not the one that we're about to see, but the one after that. But that doesn't address what's happening right now in the state.
That's a good point. Now let's move on to number 2 in our countdown of the 2016 news stories, the 2016 elections. Donald Trump is the president-elect, and his inauguration is coming up in January, of course. But New Mexico went for Democrat Hillary Clinton, and Democrats took back control of the New Mexico House in 2016. Julianne, starting with you. What do you think New Mexicans will be watching for in this new Trump administration? We've covered some possible things, in part of our top 10 list. But is there anything that jumps out at you specifically from what he has said or done that says, uh-oh, New Mexico, better watch out here?
I mean, I think there's so much territory to cover there, but I'll pick on this issue of federal jobs and federal funding.
Okay.
The Los Alamos National Laboratory is really important to the economy in northern New Mexico. Lots of people who live in Santa Fe and live in Espanola have jobs there, everything from, fixing the locks on the doors to, being the scientists doing the research. And so I think there's a real fear. The Trump administration circulated this survey. Hey, Lanel, could you go ahead and identify your coworkers who believe in climate change so that we can just kind of know who they are? And so I think there's this fear that, will Lanel be reduced to just weapons research? Would it become just a nuclear defense kind of research facility? If Donald Trump gets us into the kind of international incidents that I think a lot of people expect, there might be an argument to be made that we need to do more weapons research and development, and I think that is a dangerous trajectory.
That's a Russell Contreras. For our senators and congresspeople that are in office right now. To thread that needle, what Julianne just described, especially if you're a Democrat, which you have 2 senators.
Right.
Democrats. That's a tough one to come in here and advocate for what really is our lifeblood here.
Yeah, it's federal spending. It's
Right.
federal, and I think that's part of what we expect. The other aspect, I think, of the election is, as I was reflecting the other day, that's not really talked about, is the complete gentrification of northern New Mexico. We have a speaker who's white now. Yeah. We have a Senate Majority Leader who's white. We have 2 senators, U.S. senators, who are white. So in the most Hispanic state, it's led by all Democrats who are all white. So this is something that the Democrats are facing as a problem, because the only law, the major state wide law office is held by Hispanic is a Republican. So this election, yes, was on Trump, but now the Democrats are in a position where they have cut off the lifeline for Hispanic politicians on the bench, with the exception of the upcoming gubernatorial. Now, if someone like an Alan Weber wins, you have a case here that New Mexico, the government, is run by all white males in the most Hispanic state. That is a problem. And I think that, as we look at what the results of the election, is something we haven't discussed yet.
That's very interesting, my friend. I like that a lot. Steve, I'm going to pick up on that. I mean,
As a white guy here.
As a white guy.
there you go. But atmospherics, or whatever the current term is, it means something. I mean, imagine being a Democrat in Washington right now. You see what I mean? This is a difficulty for Mr. Udall, Mr. Heinrich. You got to walk in there and be able to make your case about stuff. It's tough.
It really is, and probably the closest congressional guy to Trump would be Steve Pierce down in southern New Mexico, and because his relationship with our governor isn't very good, as we know. She's tried to kind of mend fences and make nice with him, but we haven't heard any response from him on that.
And she's a lame duck as well, so yeah.
That's right. And one thing, when we're talking about the APD and the federal monitoring, I wonder if Trump's going to keep up a federal monitor in Albuquerque. That's one thing that could fall by the wayside in the next 4 years.
Let's bring it back local with you. I mentioned the House has flipped for the first time, went back to the Democrats after a bit of time for Republicans. My sense, I want to bounce something off of you. Sometimes when there has been a flip, that first time around is more about positioning. Even, inside the party, who's going to be able to do what, who's going to be able to do what. What's your anticipation with the House being controlled by Democrats now in our next coming session?
Well, I think the next coming session is going to be ugly. I think there's going to be, and especially in the House. The Senate tends to get along better, but in the House, I think that a lot of Republicans are going to cry foul. Oh, this is retaliation. And just like the Democrats did 2 years ago when the Republicans took over. It was only 2 years the Republicans ran the House seat. But so I think there's going to be the flip side of that, committee assignments and everything else. Right. And it is a lot of positioning. The one good thing about this budget crisis is that there's not a whole lot of luxury. Some people, I think, will feel like we don't have the luxury of just doing partisan spitball. So. So hopefully a lot of people will feel like that and not just be finger pointing all the time.
That's right.
I can't be that optimistic having observed the legislature all this time.
Or Marisa, the other idea is you have power now and you come in and you come out firing all guns. You go crazy. You pile as many bills as you can, perhaps a lot of revenue enhancement bills, and just railroad them through, make this governor somehow look you wanted to. Do you know what I mean? And it's a lot of stuff other than just getting stuff done. It could be about positioning in that first time around. What do you think could be happening, though, in this next session with Democrats? Any idea?
I mean, it's hard to imagine that that's really going to be what it's like because we're in such dire straits in so many ways, I mean, I think, we were just talking about the budget and the problems there, but there's so many places in New Mexico where there just is a lot of problems. So maybe it's not time for that kind of political jockeying. Maybe it's time to have a more pragmatic approach to government, and maybe I'm just being way too optimistic about how it's going to shake out. But I mean, and every single story that we've talked about in this top 10, I think relates to the national election in some way also, and into these kind of bigger considerations about what are things going to be like.
That's right.
In their defense, both incoming Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth and House Speaker Brian Egoff have said they really want to concentrate on fixing the budget. That's the big elephant in the room, to do a cliche here.
Sure.
But so hopefully they'll stay true to that. And both of them are good, honest guys. So.
That's right. Julian, it brings to mind another thought as well. Perhaps for Democrats in the Senate and the House, this time around, it's setting up what potentially could be a governor who's going to be a Democrat, meaning Michelle Lujan Grisham has announced officially she's going to get in. And perhaps it's an early way to get like a jobs program going that she could follow up with. Do you see what I'm going at here? Some kind of Democrat flip in the whole thing. What do you make of that idea?
I still think that we're going to be in this situation where you still have to get through all the layers of government. So whatever comes out of the legislature, most of it has to go across the governor's desk. And we'll see what she does with it. I think that there's always a possibility. I share that maybe unrealistic optimism that somebody comes up with an idea that will work. You know, Steve mentioned the film incentives when we talked about art stories a little while back, and I think that all the argument that happened about the film incentives and capping the program, you know, is there a little wiggle room there now to see that, you know, the cap has been, you know, reached and it's rolling over so that new productions that are coming into the state are waiting for years to get their incentive money back. You know, that might be an area where we see a little movement.
Yeah.
But, I'm not sure that we're going to get a lot of creative ideas that move, you know, that lay a foundation for potentially for a Democratic governor. And I don't think that it's a guarantee that you're going to see a Democratic governor in New Mexico.
That's right. Let's pick up on that, Russell, as well. We have gubernatorial races on. One announced person in. Senator Udall has announced he is not, as a matter of fact. So where's the stakes of the game for Democrats right now?
I mean, you have the Attorney General, Hector Balderas, say he's considering it.
Right.
You hear rumblings about Joe Cervantes in the South and possibly Jeff Apodaca and maybe Alan Weber on the Democratic side, Republican, possibly Steve Pierce, maybe Mayor Richard Berry. So you're seeing it starting to shape up, but I think the issues that will dominate this gubernatorial race in 2 years will be shaped in the next year. So what happens out of this budget, what happens in response to things the Trump administration do will be what defines that race.
That's right.
And let's not throw out the possibility that the current governor leaves for the Trump administration, and that changes everything as well. I think there's certainly been talk of that. Steve, you've written a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's been no indication of that. Heather Wilson's visited with the Donald.
at Trump
or
Tower.
she's going to, yeah. But I haven't heard of Susanna getting an invitation yet. But it could happen. I mean, he's talking to Carly Fiorina and some of his old people who've been critics, Mitt Romney.
That's right. That's right. So whatever Governor Martinez said certainly can't be as bad as some of the other people have said. Now, up next, we talk about the top news stories of 2016 on our annual countdown here on New Mexico in Focus.